This is the Comics Alternative Interviews. Happy New Yo with Craig Yoe. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And for our very first episode of the Comics Alternative for 2017, we're going to continue the tradition by starting off the year with an interview with good friend Craig Yoe. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But many times you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
That's right. And since we're talking to Craig Yoe, you can check out dcbservice.com for the latest in Yoe Books under IDW Publishing.
That's right. You can find great discounts on all sorts of comics, especially the kind put out and collected by Craig Yoe. That's dcbservice.com. You got to go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your Yoe Books there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, it's always fun having Craig on the podcast, and we had a really fun conversation talking about his new volume, Super Weird Heroes.
Yeah, and along with some of the other upcoming stuff that he's putting together, and he always seems to have a bunch of projects on the burner at one time.
Oh, yeah. He and Cletia seem to keep busy constantly, and he tells us about some of the new horror that horror books that have recently come out, and also ones that are planned for the coming year.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and get to that conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
We love all the stuff from your books, and we look for the upcoming titles. They don't cost a whole lot of dough. That's why we say yippee-yi-yo. You too can buy all of your books. Be a fan, and there's one way to show.
Well, Andy and I are here with someone we consider not only a friend of the Comics Alternative, but maybe I'm going out on a limb here and will piss other people off, but I can safely say our favorite interviewee of all time. And this is Craig Yoe. Craig,
wait, we didn't discuss this in advance.
Andy's not in agreement. Okay.
A little dissent is good.
Yeah.
But Craig, welcome back on the podcast.
I always liked Derek best anyway.
Okay, so this interview has already gone off the rails. So, and
can we stop now? And we're like, why we're behind?
Yes. But as we have for the past couple of years, we wanted to have you on again at the very beginning of the new year as
Happy New Yo
for our Happy New Yo show. Not only our first interviewee, but our first show of the new year on the Comics Alternative.
Oh, this is so awesome.
And as we've done in the past, we wanted to talk with you about not only your new works, plural, that have come out recently and will soon be coming out, but also to talk about other things going on in the life of Craig Yoe. And maybe we can start by asking you about this year being your 50-year anniversary in comics culture. So happy anniversary. And
Thank you.
And explain what that means. 50 years.
Well, it's 50 years, and I'm still going wrong. But the way that's is dated is that when I was a wee lad, I was into Uncle Scrooge and Little Lulu and really dug those. But then I grew up and became so interested in girls that I didn't want to, mess myself up by being into comics, because a girl back in the 60s in junior high would hear that someone's into comics, she would you would immediately be shunned forever, and there was no chance to get some soft and round in her parents' rec room in the basement. So I didn't want anything to do with comics. I grew up, or was trying to, as when you're going through adolescence with your pimples and those funny feelings you're having, and you're trying to grow up, and so I put comics aside. But interestingly, some friends of mine confided in me, because again, it was something you wanted to keep hidden from the rest of the world. But some friends did confide into me that they were buying these comic books called Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and they were all jazzed up about them and into. They were Mary Marvel marchers marching around and privately, and they turned me on to them, and I thought, like, wow, this is way cool, and I became very interested in comics again, even as an adolescent, and to the point that I put out my first fanzine 50 years ago this year. So I'm celebrating 50 years in making comics history. Our slogan at Yoe Books is making comics history. So I'm celebrating 50 years of making comics history. And in fact, the first fanzine, I got turned on to Marvel Comics, but I immediately, my friends stuck with just that, but I immediately became interested in the whole field. I mean, I'm not only Marvel, but DC, and not only DC, I became interested in the New Yorker cartoonists and the communist political cartoonists from the New Masses magazine of the Masses magazine of the 20s, and the New Masses later on. And I became interested in animation and romance comics and cowboy comics. And in fact, the first issue wasn't about Marvel, the contemporary scene, which is what most fanzine guys were doing. But I did a fanzine dedicated to the Ghost Rider. I thought he was like a way cool character, and so I was already interested, like, in the history of the medium. That's all. I've always had a Jones for that, even as a young teenager. So 50 years ago, my little fanzine appeared. It was called Yoe&nbsp. I was. You guys get the reference. I was quite smitten with Yoe from Joseph Heller's Catch-22 novel.
One should be.
Yeah, as one should be. And comics in their way kind of radicalized me, and just by their culture, and also, again, by getting into the communist cartoonists like Art Young and Robert Minor. I discovered a book of theirs in the basement of our local Akron Public Library. And so those kind of radicalized me. And I became, a disaffected youth reading Joseph Heller and J.D. Salinger and things like that at the same time. But I loved Catch-22, and I felt I was Yoe&nbsp at the time. And so I named my fanzine Yoe&nbsp. Yoe&nbsp with an E to differentiate it enough to make it mine, and to also keep the Joseph Heller's attorneys away, I guess.
So how was this fanzine, how did you distribute it, produce it, and so on?
Well, there was something very cool about that. I joined what was more common then. I mean, this is way pre-internet and everything, but one of the ways you communicated with people that shared like interests was something called an APA. And then this was started in science fiction fandom. They had APAs, and so some of the people who graduated from science, or along with their science fiction fanishness, got into comics. People like Jerry Bales and Don and Maggie Thompson started an APA. And APA is APA, meaning Amateur Press Association. And the word association is important here because people from for the Kappa Alpha, or KA as it was called at times, they would send in their little or thick fanzines to pages to a central mailer, and that central mailer would staple them all together into one big thick fanzine, and you were required to send in so many pages per year or to keep up your membership, and then every issue had all the contributors. I think there was 30-some people from, I was in Ohio, and there's people from California, like Bill Blackbeard and Fred Patton, a big early science fiction fan, and Don and Maggie Thompson were in Ohio also. So I eventually got to meet them when I helped staple one of these big issues of Kappa Alpha in their living room. But there was people in Australia and France, and so here I was, like this young teenage kid, yet I was like hobnobbing with all these B&Fs, which were that was those initials stood for big name fans. So I'm associating with like the founders of comics fandom, like Jerry Bales and Don and Maggie and important early collectors like Bill Blackbeard, who his collection formed the basis of the Billy Ireland Museum, and here I am, a young kid, and they're actually taking what I'm doing seriously, and Bill Blackbeard was super complimentary about my fanzines, and so this gave me a real boost, and I'm actually publishing. I got a hold of an old mimeograph machine that some school was selling, and I'm learning to design a little magazine, and I'm publishing it in the basement, and buying ink for my mimeograph, and and sending it out, and following, trying to meet deadlines, and at a young age I got into publishing. It was thrilling to me, and to meet these people and to interact and to read all their other contributions and get feedback on what I was doing. So it really was important to my life and to my career. I mean, my career grew from when I was a teenager and what I was doing. So what a great activity. I mean, I guess in some ways, things like blogging and Facebook and all that stuff is kind of the same thing, but, maybe too much of a good thing. But, but it was a heady kind of thing like that. Why everybody else was wasting their time in the back seat of cars and drive-ins, getting that soft and round, I was in my parents' basement making comics fanzines.
Craig, you just solved a mystery for me, that when I've been to Michigan State to look at the Kappa Alpha issues that they have there, and why they're so kind of difficult to cite. I didn't realize that they were kind of an aggregate of multiple fanzines put together, and that's why when you get to and there's not like a table of contents or anything, it seems like, in some of those. So I didn't know how to you would have the title, you would have the Kappa Alpha title, then you would have a title of the individual fanzine, and then the title of a column within that fanzine. Makes it really complicated to cite something
I
like
guess
that.
if you know what's going on.
Yeah, and I didn't know that, so that's good to know.
So it was more than a publishing activity or making a fanzine. It was a group. It was a so it was really nice to have that support and role models and older people encouraging me, and it was awesome. Yeah. So Kappa Alpha is still going. They must be in their zillionth issue by now or something. But and I think they pretty much just talk about superheroes and stuff. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. They might have more breadths now. But even back then, I was sort of like anomaly. The fact that I wasn't talking about superheroes, and I was a young hippie as I was growing there, and so I was putting in anti-war statements and things like that and stuff, which rankled some of the members, and maybe even a couple of them called for my dismemberment or something. Dismemberment. So it was cool though. But that was 50 years ago. My first fanzine was 50 years ago. So I have 50 years of making comics history. So we're going to celebrate this year.
So it's going to go on all year long, this celebration?
Yeah. Or maybe for the next 50 years we'll still be celebrating till I reach my 100th. Can I come back on the show when I reach my 100th?
Of course you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk about that then? Okay, good.
We'll plan on that. Well, making this,
I plan on putting our 50th anniversary logo in all the books that come out this year. I'm going to be making special convention appearances, and I'm planning maybe a publication or two if I can get it together. We have such a long lead time now with our books that I'm almost working on 2018 now. So I'm not quite sure what I'll do publication wise, but I've got some ideas in how to celebrate and that I got to get down and do. But it's kind of a milestone.
Yeah.
50 years.
Yeah.
Years and still it's going a really long. Big one.
Yeah, that's a long time, right? Mm-hmm. What a waste of life.
Well, Craig, making the segue from your 50th anniversary in terms of writing about comics into one of your most recent books, Super Weird Heroes, this first volume, outrageous but real. In your introduction, you discuss some of these issues that you were just telling us, your history with comics and the fact that, I guess, two nemeses of yours in terms of getting into comics were both Frederick Wortham and your mother.
Yes. Well, my mother with the girls from school shared the idea that comics for a young man were wrong, and there was the sign of some kind of arrested development or something, and that you couldn't be socially fit in reading comics. And so my mother was horrified when she found that in a trunk that she thought was just full of old forgotten toys or something at the bottom of my bed, that I had thrown those out and made stacks and stacks of these Marvel comics, filled with the adventures of men in tights slugging each other. She had, when I was a young kid, got me a subscription to Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, and so she was cool with that. But now, as an older kid, supposedly growing up, and she never did like superheroes ever. Once, on a train, when some traveling soldiers gave me a stack of comics, I guess it was okay for American soldiers to. I think my mom probably thought even they were wrong to be reading comics certainly at their age and profession. But when they gave me the stack of comics on my way to my cousin's house to visit them in Kansas, but by the time we arrived in Newton, Kansas, she begrudgingly let me carry the comics, but when we got to the cousin's door, she made me give all the superhero ones to my cousins whose mother didn't care what they did at all. She was the opposite of my mom. And so, so my mom was against superhero comics, and at a certain point when she did discover these, she got hysterical about them, and my dad had to calm her down and say he would take care of it. And but he said, son, I'm going to let you make this decision. You can read comics or you can grow up and be a man. You decide. And so with that in mind, and not wanting to, and already fearful about embarrassing myself if some girls at school ever found out that I read comics, I decided, okay, I'll go along with what Dad wants. And so we marched out to the backyard and made a funeral pyre of my comics, and Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and the X-Men went up in smoke. And my dad was proud of me, and I secretly regretted it, and actually probably started plotting revenge.
Yeah, that was really painful to read in the intro.
Yeah. So I vowed not to grow up and to somehow continue to be involved with comics, and so here I am today, still shunned by women and intellectually poor, and all my money's wasted buying old funny books. It's a sad story.
Now with the Super Weird Heroes book, one of the things I was wondering about is what kind of qualifies a character as a super weird hero?
Well, we kind of have this pantheon of heroes and accepted heroes, and they're not all superheroes have some weirdness, but but these characters that I've assembled in this book are super weird. I mean, one's a giant hand, that's pretty weird. And,
yes, it is.
Yeah, and one is is an old man who dresses up as a woman, Madame Fatale, and bashes no goodniks with her cane, and then there's Kangaroo Man, who has when Batman had Robin, he thought Kangaroo Man must have thought you actually had to have a bird or animal species. He mistook Robin for being a bird, so he got a kangaroo as his sidekick, and the kangaroo talks to him, and so these heroes are pretty weird, and some were weird in a weird, certainly, but also maybe good way. Kismet, Man of Fate, was the first Muslim superhero, and it's interesting. He was created by Jews, and Jerry Iger and Ruth Rosh, and he was fighting Nazis, bare chested and with a little fez on his head with a V on it for victory, and yet he was a Muslim, and always spouting kind of Muslim type sayings, and by Allah, I will defeat these Nazi vermin, or something like that. And then there's I like the Deacon, who he was a criminal who when the gang he was in decided to rob a bank and knock, and in doing, as part of doing that, would be knocking off the guard. He kind of got a little conscious and tried to get out of the plan, and so when he was leaving the gang headquarters, the gangsters mowed him down with bullets, and he crawled through the woods into an abandoned Catholic church, and donned a priest's outfit, which is as his superhero costume to fight crime, which is weird enough. But then, along with that, some young kid kind of mirroring what happened, gets bullied by some gang people, and he finds his way out to the church, and he actually hooks up with the priest. So you have this Catholic priest and this young boy named Mickey, and who now lives with him and sleeps in bed together and at night, but by day they fight crime as the Deacon and Mickey. So it's a little inappropriate to me. But who could not call that weird?
You mention several times throughout the book in your introductions the weirdness, not so much of the superhero concepts, but the relationships that we have between heroes and their sidekicks. Of course, making reference to the famous or infamous, depending on where you stand, relationship between Bruce Wayne and Robin, Dick Grayson. And I think you even have an image of the two in bed together. And then you kind of use that as a touchstone throughout to make reference to other kind of strange, unlikely relationships that, depending on how you read it or where you're coming from, you can look at innocent or rather skewed.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, certainly many superheroes were kind of modeled after Superman, but it seems like more were modeled after Batman, because Superman was just kind of like a generic hero, and they couldn't. And when some of the publishers came up with kind of superheroes in the mold of Superman, they actually got sued by DC Comics and won. So they had to come up with heroes that were different. So they were doing animals and vegetables and minerals or whatever that were superheroes, to try to, come up with their own novel approach. And so like Batman was Batman. So let's have a sound alike, Catman. And so they didn't quite get it because Batman struck fear or struck terror, rather, we learn, into the hearts of bad guys. But I don't think a guy dressed in a cat, a bright yellow cat costume with bare legs quite strikes fear and more like laughter into the hearts of the criminals, So Catman, though, he instead of taking on Robin, he takes on a bird's enemy is another cat, I guess. So he takes on a young girl named Kitten, and all these sidekicks, they're all these young. They're always like these young kids who, without parents, and these superheroes just take them in. I don't know where Child Protection Services are, because like Catman arms Kitten with a machine gun and takes her over to Germany and throws her in the midst of a giant, Nazi battalion and has her mow down and fight Nazis, with her little machine gun, and. It's like these sidekicks are really kind of crazy, I mean, the kangaroo sidekick is just one of them, and Kitten is another, and then there's Black Cobra. You talk about the kind of sexual side of it, or the maybe Freud and Wertham might frown on the fact that the Black Cobra and the Cobra Kid are like have these weird snake costumes with cobras kind of on their heads. And to fight criminals, that they actually have they hit them with giant snakes, So you have this older superhero and his young boy sidekick dressed as snakes hitting bad guys with snakes. It's just like these must have been Freud's favorite comics for sure.
Well, you mentioned the Catman and his sidekick, the Kitten, which is what his niece. In your intro to that piece, you point out that apparently one of Kitten's abilities is to change age and maturity level. And we can see this in this story that you include here from Catman Comics number 26, where there are times that she does look like a young girl, and then other times, especially in terms of the shape of her body, she looks a little more mature. In fact, at one
she seems to go from, I mean, there's no explanation for this. It just seems like whatever mood the artist was in, panel to panel, she goes from like looking like a 10-year-old to like a, a hot, 20-something girl, so.
Yeah, and at one or two times, the way that she's drawn, I got the impression that she could be mistaken for a little person, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because sometimes even when she's 10, she has, swelling in her breasts, and so she has breasts, and other times she's flat-chested, and I don't know. Sometimes she's as tall as Catman and flat-chested, and other times again her chest comes back. So it's just kind of all over the place. Yet the artist I think he was one of the better draftsmen of comics. He was
Charles Quinlan.
Charles Quinlan. I mean, he was really quite good. I'd really become a fan of his work when I was researching this book. But I mean, it is curious how Kitten just is, before our eyes, grows and shrinks and matures and is a little girl again, and she's just it's curious. I have no explanation for it. You guys have PhDs? Maybe you can tell me. Have you figured out what's behind this?
Maybe if our PhDs were in psychology.
Yeah. What you mentioned Quinlan's art. There's the one panel where Catman slams a guy into the panel border, and the panel border gets all distorted because of that. I mean, that's brilliant.
That's fun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like fun was the operative word for the artists back then. They weren't taking this stuff too seriously. They were having fun and amusing the guys that were in the sweatshop with them, or if they were home working alone, or amusing themselves. And they were just having fun, and they didn't take it too seriously. And maybe Quinlan was just in the mood to draw a more mature girl in one panel and a little girl in the next. And nobody really cared. The publishers just wanted the artists to fill up pages, and I think that's where a lot of these superheroes came from. A lot of them were like in the back pages. Golden Age comics back then would have like 7 or 8 or 9 features in each issue. There'd be a superhero feature, and then a cowboy feature, and then a humor feature, and none of them were taken too seriously. Nobody was saying like we got to create perfect hero to be made into movies and toys and things like that. They were just saying like we got to fill up some pages and print ink on paper and sell a lot of them at a dime each, and hopefully make a lot of post-depression money. So they were churning this stuff out, but the publishers didn't care, and the kids were just goggle-eyed just to read this colorful, fun stuff. And so the artists in between the publisher and the kids, they were just doing their own thing, and nobody really cared. But they would have fun with it. They would break the fourth dimension, or not worry too much about continuity, or draw outlandish costumes. And some of the costumes of the super weird heroes, like a Rainbow Boy, he flies through the air with a rainbow trailing behind him. But the coolest part of him is he has a rainbow mohawk.
Yeah.
On top of his head, So it's and Bullet Girl and Bullet Man, they have these bullets on top of their heads and stuff like that. And Mothman, he's just a hoot. Again, like Batman strikes terror in evildoers' hearts, but is anyone terrorized by a moth except maybe worried that they might eat a hole in their sweater? And then Moth is, most of these costumes, they must have run out of material after they did Batman and Superman's costume, because it was the war, and there was they were only allowing you so much meat to buy so much meat. They only must have allowed superheroes to buy so much fabric, because many of these superhero guys are half naked, most of them bare-legged, and people like Kismet, Man of Fate, bare-chested, and Mothman. He's not wearing much more than his wings as he flits about, circling light bulbs and things like that, and also trying to do in criminals.
One of the characters that I think kind of encapsulates everything you just described there in terms of not only costume, but a story that seems kind of unedited, uncontrolled, and then other weird aspects is Captain Truth.
Oh yeah,
who just has a pair of shorts and a cape and I don't know how to describe it. A giant hat with a feather on it. And I always wonder when he says he's about to change. He's going to change costume from his blue suit with a red bow tie. Where is he keeping the hat?
And do we want to know?
You're thinking too. You're overthinking.
And that story is called The Case of the Vanishing Boy or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's no vanishing boy. No boy vanishes in that story.
Oh, you're right. Well, they start off with that. Well, no, he did vanish. Did you see the boy in the story? No.
No, there's a boy. He gets the power to wish for whatever he wants. Or he may or may not have that power. I guess Captain Truth kind of helps him with that, but the kid never vanishes. Yeah. So that's what I was saying, was that feels like a story that maybe somebody came up with the title, they started it one way, and it just kind of ended up what it was. And don't the bad guys in that steal light bulbs to get the tungsten?
The tungsten, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
And something else that's weird about the Captain Truth story is in the very first panel where we get the premise. The image has nothing to do with the story. Basically, Captain Truth is foiling a mugger's attempt to attack Uncle Sam as Uncle Sam is walking down the street. It's like, what the hell does that have to do with what follows? It doesn't, but it doesn't have to, I guess.
Well, he's fighting. Captain Truth is fighting for the truth, justice, and the American way. So I think it's kind of a symbolic political cartoon effort. Almost.
Yeah. Don't mug Uncle Sam.
Don't mug the American people. Yeah. Represented here by Uncle Sam. Maybe the weirdest costume. I mean, yeah, Captain Truth looks pretty naked, but when you compare him to Phantasmo, he looks overdressed.
Yeah.
Phantasmo is like, all he's wearing is like a red, on this one famous cover, and in many of his stories, all he's wearing is like a red ribbon, a very small red ribbon, a very short red ribbon. It doesn't wrap much around his body, maybe 2 or 3 times. And he's, flying through the air, bare-ass naked, right on the cover of a Dell comic book. Dell was the company that later brought us Donald Duck and Little Lulu, and they had the Dell pledge to parents that they would always be wholesome, and they held out because since they had their wholesome image, they felt above having to have the Comics Code be part of the Comics Code Authority with their symbol on the cover. They thought that almost tainted them by association or something, that they took umbrage at the idea that they even had to have some controls because they were so wholesome. But here, earlier in their history, they had a comic book called The Funnies with Phantasmo flying across the cover, again with his bare bottom for all the world to see.
I hear you're gonna cosplay as Phantasmo in your upcoming con appearances. Is that true?
Well, you'll see it here. I mean, you'll probably be seeing. You always see a lot of me, but you might be seeing more than you bargained for.
Craig Yoe as you've never wanted to see him before.
Right. And you'll never be able to unsee.
Yeah, your superhero abilities would be to burn retinas.
Hey, it's a power.
Yeah. You've mentioned earlier Charles Quinlan as being one of your favorite artists in this collection. He makes an appearance more than a couple of times in this volume because, as you point out, he's also one of the creators of the Deacon and Mickey, but he also is one of the creators behind Captain Fearless.
Yes, right. Yeah, he was a prolific guy and an interesting guy. No one had known much about him, but I don't just present funny, wacky, and very entertaining stories here, but I try to introduce each one with some background on my take of the hero, but also biographical information about the artists and writers. And no one ever knew much about Charles Quinlan, but I was able through some newspaper records to track down an obituary of his son, which mentioned his daughter, his sister, who was so this son and this man and woman were the son and daughter of Charles Quinlan. So I kind of put those pieces together, and I was able to contact Quinlan's daughter, who herself is an artist and was quite proud of her dad, and told me all about him, how he kind of probably worked himself to an early grave, working so hard as a cartoonist, and all the he was very pressured by things like deadlines and stuff. He was very. She told me that he was very. He was kind of upset about some of the scripts that he was given, because I'm sure he was. I don't think he was like an anti-American guy, but there were just so many of the stories back then were just kind of jingoistic propaganda, and they were instructed to draw, the Japanese in caricatured fashion, and the Germans too. And I think he just, as an artist, he found this. He wasn't comfortable with all this and everything. So, he seemed like kind of a stressed out guy from his work in the comics industry. And he would have liked to have maybe gotten into fine art. He did some kind of Western paintings in the style of Remington and like that. But, he was kind of really bringing home the groceries with the comics. And he didn't find it always comforting to do them. But I think he drew some sensational comics. I mean, aside from Kittens, going from a little girl to a shapely woman and back to a little girl in the next panel. I think he really was a great artist, and yeah, he's one of the more prolific, super weird hero artists.
That leads me to one of the questions I had, one of the thoughts I had about this book, because I think one of the things I really appreciate about it is that it exposes me to a bunch of different artists that I wasn't really familiar with, and Quinlan's one of those, but others like Chuck Winter and Charles Sultan and was it Pierce Rice? Is that it? Yeah, that art is amazing, and I'm just wondering, are there artists in here that you feel kind of deserve more attention from comics history than they've gotten?
Well, that's interesting, because in some ways, this is my first superhero book in the line of Yoe Books. We've done over 100 books, and this is the first superhero one. But for me, the real heroes of the comics, I enjoy presenting all these different characters and different kinds of stories, from horror, romance to kids comics to now superheroes. But to me, the real heroes of the comics were the cartoonists. Those are the people that really get me excited. The characters of comics that get me excited is the creators. And so in some ways, I'm presenting all these colorful and interesting heroes, but I'm also, and I'm having fun doing it. But my greatest pleasure is presenting the work of some of these cartoonists, and and nearly every story is preceded by some facts about the character and their appearances, but then also biographical stuff about the cartoonist, and even most everyone has either a photograph or a self caricature of the cartoonist. Many of them never printed before. So I feel like this book is fun, yet there's a serious side. I'm able to present the lives of these artists and writers too, where I can find them, and so that's a lot of fun to dig up and find, with some help some of my friends, yearbook photos and police blotter photos, and wherever I can find a photo of a cartoonist, and so we can actually put faces to these names and names to these often anonymous stories. So that's a big joy of mine as a comics historian and writer to do that. So I'm glad you found some artists that you like. I mean, I think Charles Voigt, who was an old comic strip artist who beautifully drew this comic strip called Betty, and he's just he's one of the world's greatest draftsmen, Charles Voigt. Yet I was able to get him in a book because he did a wacky superhero called Jeep and Peep. The Jeep is an actual flying Jeep that flies around, and but he actually he did a couple. He was kind of another prolific weird superhero artist. What else did he do besides Jeep and Peep? You tell me. You just read the book.
I want to stop and talk about Jeep and Peep for a minute, because that to me is the most batshit crazy story in this book. And what tips it for me is, for our listeners who haven't seen the book, they're basically these trees come to life and start robbing people and breaking into banks and jewelry stores and stuff. And it seems like there's an obvious conclusion or solution, but also Jeep and Peep kill the trees, and there's one tree that has its hands up, so it's clearly surrendering.
Yeah, and
yet they murder that tree.
Oh well. Yeah, they got kind of excited about overexcited maybe in their superhero mission. Take no prisoners, take no trees. I mean, when you accost a bank robbing tree, I mean, no jail will hold them because the tree's too big. So I think they were probably just doing a public service by killing the tree and moving on to the next bad guy, bad tree or.
Well, along with that, I'm with Andy that the Jeep and Peep story is probably the wackiest in this collection, or at least one of them. And we see the cover of issue number 1 of Jeep Comics, which is where this story originally appeared, and you see Jeep and Peep in the flying jet-powered Jeep flying through these angry trees. But the cover of Jeep Comics number 2, that I want to see this story where you have Jeep and Peep being followed by, and this is the way that you describe it, a giant Michelin Man on acid character with punk hair and a clown face and polka dot skivvies.
That only begins to describe him, right?
So, I think that whatever that story was would have this one beat.
Well, the interesting thing is that guy never appears in any story. He was just a cover boy.
In issue number 2, he never did that creature, whatever flying thing, doesn't appear.
Number 2 is a Jeep and Peep and their flying Jeep fighting a dinosaur. So that seems almost normal next to the third. Oh, you're right. That is number 2. That guy. Well, I'm getting confused here. First, there's the dinosaur. First, they're going through the forest. Yeah. Right. Number 2 is the Michelin guy with the polka dot underwear.
And you give us the UK version as well, which has this strange Michelin Man on acid character in different colors.
Yeah, he turns blue there. Yeah, he's actually not, as I recall, he's actually not inside. It's just like this wacky cover that, I mean, again, that stopped making sense was seemed to be a byword of golden age comic books. There's no rhyme or reason for this character, but he is in some sense arresting. I mean, he does get your attention.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned before the amount of work that goes into your average book. When did you begin working on Super Weird Heroes?
It was when we started Yoe Books about 5 some years ago, and I started on it. And I actually I showed it to a couple publishers who was just kind of starting out. Then everyone wanted me to do it, and IDW said definitely committed to it. And then I just sort of two things happened. I kind of just got involved with other projects, and just worked on it a little at a time. And also, this is one of my hardest books because among collectors, superheroes is the big thing. Everything else kind of pales next to that. So collectors are after, hardcore collectors and rich collectors are after these superhero books, even the weird ones. And so it was actually kind of hard to track down all the comic books because many of them are locked away in collections, and even within the collections, they're locked in these plastic devices that these collectors, like coffins or something that these collectors put these. So there's no chance of getting a hold of them, and they don't want, they're too worried about people scanning the comics because they might lose if you nick the in the process, the value might go down a couple $1,000s, So, so it took a long time to track down all the material. It would have been easy just to have the weird covers or something, but to actually have these full stories, it took a lot of research and begging and borrowing comic books. In the front of the book, I said, according to the 46th edition of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, somebody would have to spend $105,280 to get all these comic books and to read them, from the printed page. And so, it's a pretty good bargain to get this book for $30-some to get $105,280 worth of comics.
Now, you mentioned the assistance of collectors, and you've talked with us in the past about the way that you're able to work with your connections, the network of other comics fans, collectors, readers, to get, let's say, horror stories or the weird love stories that you come across. So it was significantly more difficult to find these superhero comics?
Oh, absolutely, because again, they're the most valuable, and people are very protective of the condition, and there's superheroes are probably the hardest comics to find. Well, I don't know. Let's see. I don't know. They're the most valuable. I mean, in some ways, romance comics are hard to find because mostly, though I'm sure I think men bought romance comics too, even soldiers and stuff, to kind of get an idea of how they got a twisted idea, but to try to get an idea of how the relationship between men and women work, So I think sometimes guys were even reading romance comics, but they were primarily read by women, and women didn't necessarily save them. They're smart enough. They just read them, and it's men that seem to be more men seem to, want to collect comics, preserve them, than women who are intelligent enough just to want to read them. And then even I think when comic collecting started, like after the Batman TV show, people started, comic and around that time, and old science fiction fans starting Kappa Alpha fanzine and stuff like that. And so when the collectors market started, it was primarily men, and they might go to some old lady's attic and find a trunk of comics, and they would offer her some money for the superheroes and maybe the horror comics, and leave the romance and cowboy comics behind, and maybe they just got put out on the curb and taken to the dump. So romance comics are actually pretty hard to find. But the superhero ones, the collectors hold on to those tight, and so it's kind of. So I have friends. They're happy to help me when they can, but a lot of them didn't have these issues that I wanted. So it took a long time to track them all down. But I was surprised how many super weird heroes there really are. I mean, there is enough for another thick volume. I mean, you can see this is one of my thickest books at 320 pages. There's enough for another 320-page book. And then another collector, a friend I just visited, he lent me a lot. I went out to California, and he lent me a lot of his comics I brought back, and we've scanned over 4,000 pages. And many of those are for future potential volumes of super weird heroes. So I think there's probably enough for even a third book. If this first one has sold really, really well, and I know many people have told me they've already ordered the second based on the first, and but if the interest continues, I think we'll probably have enough for a third too, a trilogy of weirdness.
Yeah. So this one, the first one, came out the end of November of 2016, and your next one, Super Weird Heroes, Preposterous But True, is going to be coming out in August of 2017, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, this summer.
Yeah.
The first one for Christmas and post-Christmas with Christmas money buying, and the next one for the middle of the convention year. So there's sort of some marketing ideas behind that.
Yeah. Now, in working on your Super Weird Hero collections, were you in communication with John Morris, who a little more than a year ago released The League of Regrettable Superheroes?
No, I like that book a lot. I don't know him though at all, so I wasn't.
Yeah, I interviewed him for the podcast. He's a great guy, and you definitely should get in touch with him. I mean, both of you're interested in the same topic, but you're going at it in very different ways. I think with John, it's more introducing briefly a variety of strange superheroes from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, even into the 80s. But he gives just 1 or 2 pages of sample art at most, and sometimes just covers. But what you do is to provide complete stories, as you do in all of your other books as well. So you give a more solid sampling of what these stories were all about. And by doing so, you do something that you mentioned earlier. You showcase a lot of artists who maybe otherwise would fall through the cracks of comics history for many readers. So it's the creators themselves who become the heroes of these books. Much more so than, let's say, in John's collection.
Right, you are good. But, but like I said, I really enjoyed John's book, and hopefully the books complement each other.
Maybe you guys can go on tour together.
Yeah, there you go. Who's going to be the sidekick?
Who wants to expose the most flesh?
When we were talking about artists too, one of the things that stood out to me, and I may be off about this or not have enough of a sense of history to talk about this, but a lot of the artists that really stood out to me, and I mentioned those earlier, like Charles Sultan and Chuck Winter, who did Kangaroo Man, is that it really feels like there's a Lou Fine quality to their art, and I don't know if what I'm seeing is Lou Fine's influence on these artists, or that they're all kind of getting their same influence from a illustration tradition or something that's outside of comics.
Well, that's great that you brought that up. That's interesting to me because, in my 50 years of of looking into comics history. I would track down and interview some, the artists who were living at the time. Now there's a few of the artists that did these super weird heroes that are just a couple that are still alive. But when more of them were alive and I was able to actually talk with them, they invariably, all the guys, comic book wise, they worshipped and looked up to and learned from Lou Fine and Reed Crandall. They would always mention those two guys because I think those were the two guys that knew anatomy the best in comics. I mean, they were somewhat looking at maybe Harold Foster, who did Prince Valiant in the newspapers, and Alex Raymond, who did Flash Gordon in the newspapers. They would all, artists would always mention those guys, and also Milton Caniff too. But as far as in comic books, the guys that they looked up to and learned from by studying their work, or produce comics by copying their work, stealing from their work. The two guys that they stole from the most from comic books were Lou Fine and Reed Crandall. And those guys did draw beautifully. They draw through the human figure just, in a fine illustrative tradition, and knew the muscles and how they worked. And, those were the go-to guys when you needed to swipe a panel or a post. It was Lou Fine and Reed Crandall. And Reed Crandall actually, nearly 50 years ago, he was the first artist I contacted. I was showing those same cousins who had gotten my superhero comic books were visiting me in Akron, Ohio, and I was showing and my oldest cousin was he liked to do artwork, so I was showing him my creepies and eeries because Reed Crandall was in Creepy and Eerie and doing beautiful figure work and stuff in those stories. And so I was, trying to impress my cousin that, hey, remember those comics that we used to read as kids? Comics are still cool, and then great artists are involved with them, like this guy named Reed Crandall. And all of a sudden, my aunt, my cousin's mom, turned around and said, "Did you say Reed Crandall and say this Reed Crandall is an artist?" I go, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I went to school with a Reed Crandall in Newton, Kansas. I grew up with a Reed Crandall, and he was an artist. I wonder if it's the same Reed Crandall. I mean, how many Reed Crandalls in the world can there be that are artists?" And so I said, "Wow, it must be him." She goes, "Well, when I get back to Newton, which was like a town of like a couple thousand in a little town in Kansas," and they both went to Newton High School, and she contacted Reed when she got back, and I said, "Well, if you get a hold of him, if it's the same Reed Crandall, ask him to send me a Flash Gordon original," because he was at the time was drawing Flash Gordon comics, and for King Features, and so she got a hold of him. It was the Reed Crandall who was now drawing comics, and he sent me not a Flash Gordon, but a John Carter of Mars drawing, because he was also drawing Burroughs stories, Edgar Rice Burroughs stories for Carnival Press, I think. And so he gave me one of his outtake illustrations, which is as good as any that were in those books. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful drawing. But that was my first look at and possession of a piece of original artwork, and I still have it to today. And if I sell my collections, maybe it was the first piece of my collection, and maybe it'll be the last, because it's special to my heart. So so Reed was my first go-to guy. I went to him to get a piece of artwork, and I still run to the mailbox every day looking for the Flash Gordon piece, because it still hasn't arrived. But I learned later that he never got those originals back. So
that's sad. I have a place, soft spot for Reed Crandall because he did Black Hawk, and so.
Oh right, yeah, you do. Oh, those Black Hawks are beautiful. I remember Dave Stevens, who was another great masterful cartoonist. I remember he would say how much he loved the Reed Crandall Black Hawk comics. They really are pretty gorgeous. There's some pretty weird stories in those Black Hawk stories too.
Yeah, that we could do a whole show on that if you want. I wouldn't mind. I would never if I start down that rabbit hole.
I remember at Heroes Con you were showing me some of the ones you got, and so I went back to the same dealer and got a few of them myself because there's some pretty wacky, fun stories, and the wackiness is one part of it, but the beautiful Reed Crandall artwork certainly makes them shine.
Well, we've been talking about this new superhero book, Super Weird Heroes, but you have a number of other books that have come out recently. I'm thinking about the Complete Voodoo Volume 2 and Return of the Zombies, and then you have another Weird Love collection coming out. And then back in October you had, I think, what was the 4th volume of Haunted Horror, that collection. So, I mean, tell us about some of these other things. I know that the Voodoo and the Return of the Zombies came out in December, just in time. Another book just in time for Christmas.
Yeah.
Or other books, yeah.
I try not to. I mean, everything I do isn't necessarily tied in with the word weird, but most of these books you just kind of mentioned are kind of weird themselves. So it's kind of been a weird period for me. I'm in my weird period. So the zombie book, we'd done a very successful. We do a whole line, so your listeners know, we do a whole line of horror comics reprints that are pre-code horror comics. The comics that were reviled by Dr. Frederick Wertham in his book Seduction of the Innocent, and there were Synod investigations and PTA groups up in arms and actual comic book burnings. Those horror comics are pretty rare as a result, and there's different reasons for the rarity of old comics. I mean, there was the war drive to collect paper for some. I think it was just kind of a thing to keep the American people busy, and I'm not sure there was really any benefit to collecting paper during World War II, but they would collect bales of paper and supposedly for the war effort. And then there was the book burnings of the 50s, which maybe not every comic book got burned, but parents at least threw them out with the trash, after they got up in arms over the supposed badness of comics. And so the horror comics are weird, but we collect those 3 or 4 books a year, and then a regular series called Haunted Horror that's in a comic book format. We have the hardback collections, and then we have the comic book format collections of these old horror stories. So yeah, our first zombies book was quite successful, of course, partly because of how much people like zombies because of the Walking Dead TV show. So we brought out a return volume, The Return of the Zombies. I like that book because we actually die cut a zombie bite out of one corner of the book. So it's kind of fun. Yeah.
And these are all part of your Chilling Archives of Horror comic series.
Right. And we just put to bed another of those books. Sometimes we feature genres like zombies or ghosts, but sometimes, again, I like to feature artists because those are the real heroes of comics. And so this next one features a golden age artist who's still with us, one of the few, and his name is Jay Disbrow. And I got to say, his artwork is a little weird in a wonderful way, but it's got a strangeness to it. He was into he was into classical artists. He says his influences are Alex Raymond, Flash Gordon, and Harold Foster's Prince Valiant, and he liked also Bern Hogarth's Tarzan. So it's kind of this classic illustrative approach. But by the time Jay takes these influences, but then puts his own personality into it, the stories become a little wonderfully strange and twisted, and the characters are just very they're classical yet unusual looking, to where they really work nicely for horror stories, because they give it just a little bit of an edge, and a bizarreness to the artwork and stuff like that. So Disbrow's a very, very interesting artist. I mean, people like some of these strange artists like Fletcher Hanks or Basil Wolverton or Booty Rogers, who were, they were marching to the beat of a different drummer, and Jay Disembodied definitely fits into that realm. I mean, his stuff is pretty strange in a wonderful way.
Well, you've suggested we should have him on the show.
Yes. Again, there's only, a handful of these guys left now, and he's one of them, and he's sharp as a tack, and he's got interesting stories to tell about the good old days, and I think your readers would find Jay fascinating.
Well, let him know that we're interested.
Yeah. After we hang up today, I'll give him a call. Yeah. Tell him you'd like to do that, and I'm going to also try to get him to. There's a convention in New Jersey called the East Coast Comic Con. It's having me as a guest in April, and I suggested to them that they have Jay Disembodied too. So we're going to try to arrange that. So I think that'll be Trey's cool.
And tell us about some of your books that will be coming up in the next several months, because it looks like you have quite a number of them lined up for 2017.
Well, we're continuing to do Popeye collections and the classic Bud Sagendorf stories, and so he did about 100 comics, and we're getting into the reprinting the ones in the 50s, the numbered 50s now. So we're a little bit over halfway done with getting all those back in print. So I'm excited about that. And so Popeye will continue. We'll continue to do weird love stories, which are we find the weirdest, and craziest, kookiest romance comic stories, and we assemble them into collections. And those are very, very popular with men and women and sexist people and feminist people and everybody in between. So the weird love comics will continue. What else do I have out? You guys usually know more than I do. Well,
don't you have a Lou Cameron collection coming out soon?
Yeah, it's almost done. He's another great Golden Age horror artist and very innovative. I talk about him as being like the Steranko of his time. He really played with the form and devised new ways of and often surreal ways of telling the stories, and very, very interesting artist. And he eventually became a paperback writer and stopped drawing and just stuck with the writing. But in his somewhat brief comics period, he did some great horror stories and fantasy stories. And so, yeah, we're doing a whole book of that.
You have one on mummies coming out this summer, right?
The mummies. I got it. It's going to be a great book, but I gotta shamefully admit it's also kind of a opportunist kind of thing, because it just dawned on me that there's going to be a big mummies movie coming out.
Yeah.
That they think is going to be like a big tentpole movie for the Universal monsters, and so I thought, like, well, if people are going to have mummies, everybody loves their mummy, and and so I thought it'd be a good time to make a collection of old horror comic books that featured mummies, and there's a lot of fun stories. So Steve Baines, who's the host of the Horrors of It All blog, he's editing that for us, and he's doing a smashing job. And so that's going to be a fun book, Mummies.
Yeah. And then in the spring, your next haunted horror hardback collection.
That, I'm excited to say, is going to be, we have a special introduction writer for that one that we're very proud to be associated with, and we think is going to put us on the map. And you guys know so much about what I'm doing. Do you guys know who that is?
I hear he's someone not to be trusted. That's just from what I've heard.
I think this brings us full circle to the beginning when somebody mentioned who they prefer of the podcast hosts.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm playing favorites since I liked Derek and I never really liked Andy.
Yeah, we got a Tom and Dick Smothers thing going on here.
Yeah, there you go. But I heard Andy's Mummy loves him, so. But Mummy loves Andy, and I love Derek, and I asked him to please write an introduction for one of our haunted horror books. So the next one sports his wise and PhD angled take on the horror comics. It's a fun intro.
It was fun to write.
Thank you.
So our listeners who do not keep up with what is going on with Yoe Books, well, first and foremost, if they don't, then shame on them. But if people are listening to this and they're wanting to jump on board the Yoe train, the best ways of keeping up with what you do, is it through your Yoe Books website? Is it through Facebook? How would you suggest people keep up with what you and Cleetsy are doing?
But both those are good ways to do that. It probably depends on the person. We talk about our books and things that are upcoming in both those places. So if they want to go to our website and you really see, all the books laid out and what books are available and what ones are coming up, they would go to yoe.com. My last name is Yoe. And so it's Yoe Books and it's yoebooks.com, and there they are. And please check it out. It's beautiful this time of year. And then I'm on Facebook, usually talking about books. We have a Yoe Books page on Facebook. We have some individual pages. There's a page called Romance Comics, which we often we show all kinds of old romance comic books there, but we also show what's coming up for the Weird Love series. And then there's horror comics, 1950s and beyond page on Facebook. This is where we talk about us and the people who are participating talk about all kinds of comic books with a horror theme from the 1950s on, hence the name Horror Comics 1950s and beyond. But then we'll always, if we have a new book coming out, we let people know on that page know. We have a lot of that's been a very popular page on Facebook. We have a lot of people there. There's actually a Popeye page too. It's called Celebrating Popeye. So there's plenty of presence on Facebook, and then just the yoe.com, yoebooks.com. I mean,
yeah.
That's our book site. We welcome people to come visit.
Yeah. And another way for people to keep up with what you're doing is, of course, to listen to this podcast because, as we've said several times in the past, you are the most interviewed creator that we have had on the Comics Alternative, and I don't think that's going to change anytime in the near future. And in fact, I anticipate us talking with you later this spring, especially around the time, let's say April, because you have both Behaving Madly and Reefer Madness that are going to be coming out then.
Oh yeah. Doing something. Behaving Madly is I'm kind of just helping out and being a cheerleader most of that. It's really Gur's book, and it's a brilliant book, Gur Applebaum, and he's been devoutly studying the history of Mad magazine knockoffs. When Mad the comic first came out, there was a lot of comic books that called Flip and Riot and everything else that came out. But then when Mad changed from a comic book to a magazine, partly because of the criticism by the Dr. Frederick Wortham and the Senate and everything of comic books, Mad to save their sweet asses, they switched to a magazine format and kind of dodged the bullet in that way. So Mad changed from a comic to a magazine, and then there was a lot of knockoffs of the magazine because Mad was, as a comic book was going pretty good, but as a magazine it really, really took off and it became a huge success. And they're selling millions and millions of Mad magazines, and So a lot of other publishers tried to jump on the bandwagon, sometimes with the same artists. I mean, artists like Jack Davis or Basil Wolverton or the different artists that who were part of the usual gang of idiots, as they called them at Mad Magazine. They were also moonlighting for some of these rip-off magazines. So it's an interesting history that's never been shown, the Mad Magazine knockoff. So we came up with the title Behaving Madly, and we think there seems to be a lot of interest in Gur's book, and he's doing a beautiful job. He's a great writer, a great researcher, and a great friend too. So it's been a great pleasure to work with him a little bit. But it's really his baby, and people are really anticipating the birth. So that's going to be cool. And then Reefer Madness, that's going to be a fun book, and I think it's going to be a big seller. There seems to be a lot of early interest. Most people are aware of the movie, the exploitation kind of movie that came out called Reefer Madness that warned kids and their parents about the evils of marijuana. And I first became aware of it, as many people did, in the 60s when hippies were smoking marijuana. They would often be doing that at little film festivals they put together, and they're always on almost every bill in the art theaters that the hippies would go to was Reefer Madness, which was this film, warning about the dangers. But really, the hippies who were high as kites were eating the popcorn, eating their munchies in the theater seats, and laughing hysterically at this over the top movie.
Mm-hmm.
So we borrowed the title from Reefer Madness, the movie, to make Reefer Madness the comics, because a lot of crime comics and romance comics and even cowboy and detective comics and different kinds of adventure comics were composing these tales, warning kids about marijuana. So they're really over the top. I mean, a kid would smoke a joint and then just go out and get an axe and start chopping up all his classmates. These stories are just crazy, and most of them have some wholesome young girl who, one puff and then she becomes, falls into a life of walking the streets and all kinds of other sordid things. So these comics are really, really a hoot, and especially since, and there's a lot of interest, especially since at long last marijuana is becoming legalized state by state, and it's the subject is in the news a lot. So I think it's going to be a fun book.
Well, more Yoe goodness to look forward to in 2017.
Yay.
Yeah.
Hey.
Well, Craig, thank you very much for coming back on the show. We look forward to having you on again, but we especially wanted you on the very beginning of 2017 for our annual Happy New Yoe episode.
It's a great grand tradition. I really appreciate you guys doing this with me every year. You can't see me, but I've got my lampshade on my head still from last night, so that's and all these New Year's traditions, including being on your show, is a lot of fun for me. I enjoy it with you guys.
Well, thanks. It's been a lot of fun too for me.
Yes, and the best for the coming year to you, Cleetzia, and the kids.
Thank you. Yeah. Cleetzia sends her warm regards. My wife and partner in crime on the crime comics, horror comics, and romance comics, and weird superhero comics is Cleetzia Gusoni, and she actually deserves most of the credit for the things we do. If you like them, it's because of Cleetzia. If you don't like them, you can blame me. We got a couple of wonderful kids that are becoming comic fans too. We read my son was really quite intrigued by the Super Weird Heroes book. When it came in the house, he captured his imagination. So we're reading, for the good or bad, I'm corrupting him by reading him the adventures of Super Weird Heroes as he falls to sleep every night.
Well, Mother Yoe would be proud of you.
What's that?
Mother Yoe would be proud of you.
There you go. Yeah, she's probably rolling over in her grave. So, all right. Well, we're ending on Mama, and we've talked about mummies, and it's been a lot of fun, guys. And thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Shall we say it once more to be sure that Yoe Books are the finest you can purchase? The reason they're good is no mystery, is that Yoe Books are making comics history.
So there was another fun conversation with Craig Yoe where we got deep into the Super Weird Heroes book, including highlighting some of our favorite stories and artists that stood out in that book.
Oh, exactly. In fact, there was more that we could have discussed about this volume of Super Weird Heroes. We didn't get to some of the stuff that I had intended to ask him about. In fact, I wanted to point out that one of my favorite pieces in Super Weird Heroes, you said that one of your favorites was the Jeep and Peep story, and I agree, that's probably the weirdest. But one of my favorite pieces of this book is in the Bullet Man story, and when he and Bullet Girl discover the criminals associated with the old people's home. I really enjoyed the fact that it's the old people's home because it says outside on a sign, old people's home.
Yeah. Well, we could have talked about that story too. I had some things that I wanted to say about that as well, but there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, we also didn't mention that the Phantasmo story by Fletcher Hanks is from the original art for the story that Craig owns.
Yeah, it's in his collection.
Which is really impressive that he has an entire Fletcher Hanks story there.
Yeah, I mean, that guy must have a fortune in original art.
Maybe.
Yes. And then maybe he'll will it to us, his favorite podcasters, later on in life.
He'll will it to you. I don't mind being Greg's second. I'm assuming second favorite host. Maybe he likes Gene. He probably likes Gene better than me too, because Gene stayed at his house.
Yeah, well, he probably likes Gene better than both of us.
I don't know. I may be really far down on the list of comics alternative hosts.
Yeah.
But I always have fun. I always have fun hanging out with him at Heroes Con. So
yeah, he's a great guy. He does great work, and if our listeners aren't familiar with a lot of his books, then they should definitely check out not only the one that we talk most about, Super Weird Heroes, but all of his horror, Popeye, weird romance collections. And, one of the best ways of pre-ordering Craig's books is through our sponsor for this podcast, which is Discount Comic Book Service. If you go to dcbservice.com and you do a search for Yoe Books or Craig Yoe or Haunted Horror or Weird Love, you are bound to find a number of hits of Craig's books that you can find at great discounts. And I'm sure you can find the same at their sister company, In Stock Trades. So definitely check out dcbservice.com and instocktrades.com for more Craig Yoe goodness. And after you do get your books there, be sure to get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our interview with Craig Yoe, the first show of 2017. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message via SpeakPipe, or you can call us the old-fashioned way by dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right, or you can get a hold of us by email. We are two guys at comicsalternative.com, or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed. You can check that out at the number 2 Guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and let us know how we're doing.
That's right. And we do like to hear from you. So here we are at the beginning of a new year, another interview with Craig Yoe, and we hope that all of you, our fair listeners, have a great 2017 yourselves.
Yeah. I hope this episode helps kick off 2017 for you in a positive way.
Yes, it's definitely got to be more positive than 2016.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yes. So, until later, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.
From your books, and we look for the upcoming titles. They don't cost a whole lot of dough. That's why we say yippee-yi-yo. You too can buy all of your books. Be a fan, and there's one way to show it. Just say it out loud and be heard. And be certain to yippee-yi-yo it. Yoe Books does the best books around. They do humor and romance and horror. Whatever your passion may be, Yoe Books can do it, yes sir. So we say it once more to be sure that Yoe Books are the finest you can purchase. The reason they're good is no mystery. Is that Yoe Books are making comics history.